Hello, welcome once again to Lehto's Law. I'm Steve Lehto. I recently did a video about Lee Iacocca passing, and a lot of people commented and weighed in on the state of the American automobile industry and how it got that way. And it reminded me of a funny story I haven't told here before, but I had a friend years ago who worked in the industry of making springs, curly little metal things that you compress, and they're in ballpoint pens, for instance, and they're in a lot of things in our lives that we don't think about. And the guy worked for a company that made springs, and I love meeting people who are in unusual industries that I've never dealt with or thought about that much before, because I've got so many questions. If I sit down next to somebody on an airplane and find out they've got an unusual job, they might get grilled, and I hope they don't mind talking, because I'd like to ask them, questions. I actually sat next to a Division I NCAA football referee on a flight, and we had a long discussion. It was fascinating about that. But the guy who worked in the spring industry, I go, really, it's interesting. I mean, springs are all around us, but I don't actually think that much about them. And the guy goes, yeah, it's a fascinating business to be in. And I believe he was an engineer, but he was involved in management on some level, and he knew about some of the things that the company did above just the guys who made the springs. And he said, "Yeah." He goes, "You're a lemon law lawyer, right?" And I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "There's an interesting thing coming down the road, so to speak, that I think you should be aware of." And I go, "What's that?" And he goes, "Well, there's a new car coming out called a Neon, a Neon." And I'd heard about them, of course, because they had a big ad campaign. But this is right around the front end of that. And he goes, "Well, the company I work for at one point in time was asked to submit a bid on making a spring that was going to go into the transmission, the automatic transmission on the Neon." And he goes, "And when they give us the specifications for a bid on a spring," he goes, they're going to buy a lot of springs from us, but it's going to be a custom made spring. So it's got to fit in this little tiny space that they've given us. And they've said, these are the dimensions. It's got to be, fit within this three-dimensional space. And it's got to have a certain amount of, resistance, and, it's got to spring back at a certain rate. And I don't know the terms for that. I know there's engineers in the audience who could spend hours on this. But all I know is, he goes, it's got to fit in a little space, and it's got to have a certain amount of resistance and a certain amount of spring. And it's got to have a durability where it can be compressed and uncompressed like millions of times, also under certain conditions, such as very, very hot conditions or cold conditions. And he goes, and we get this specification sheet that describes this spring that, it's like a phone book. And so they give us that and go, would you please submit a bid as to what it would cost us to buy these springs from you that fit that description. And so he said that they get this description, and they pass it around. They all go sit in a conference room, and they're looking at it, and somebody goes, "It's impossible. This one's impossible." And they all came to the conclusion that the space that they needed to put the spring into, they could make a spring that would fit, but the spring that would fit in there and do what they needed it to do couldn't be done at the cost that the manufacturer wanted it done at. Now, I don't know if the manufacturer who was asking for this price was the vendor building the transmission, the vendor building a part for the transmission, or it may have been Chrysler for all I know. But I know that nowadays these things, there's all kinds of different tiers of suppliers and different vendors who, one company builds this and they give it to these people who build this, and they give it and sell it to the manufacturer of the car and so on. So I don't know who this was in the process, but all I know is the guy said, we were asked to, can you custom make a spring that will fit in this little tiny three-dimensional area that will have these certain properties, and it's got a cost below, and they had a cost point. And he said they all looked at it and said, no, it cannot be done. It cannot be done. So they went back to the person who asked them to do this and said, look, we know springs. We do springs. That's what we do. And our best guys have looked at this and determined that this is impossible. Either we've got to change the dimensions where that spring goes, or we have to make the spring out of a different material. And the different material cost is going to change the cost structure so that you can get a spring that works, but it costs more money. Or if you can change that space, we can get you the cost of the spring down to where you can use it. And they go, no, neither. And my friend said that they then will say, why not? They said, well, unfortunately, we've already, the design of the transmission is fixed. We're married to that. We cannot change anything in the structure of the transmission. The space you're putting that spring into has got to be the space we gave you. That is unalterable. That is carved in stone. So my friend said that the company was told the properties you want that spring to have would require it to be made out of an exotic material. It's going to cost more money. Otherwise, you have two choices. You can put in a spring that won't do what you want it to do, but it'll fit. Or you can put in a more expensive spring. It'll do everything you want it to do, but it'll cost more. That's your choice. And he said that the people who were asking them for the quote said, well, that's not the choice. The choice is jam a spring in that spot and make it work. And so my friend said, we can't do it, so thank you, but keep us in mind for future bids, but we're out on this one. And he said that the vendor or whoever it was he was dealing with said, oh, okay. And my friend was telling me the story, and I said, so what do you think happened? He goes, I know what happened. He said, another vendor came along and said, you want a spring that fits in that space? We'll make you a spring. You want it to cost below this? We'll make it out of cheaper metal, which will fatigue and won't last very long and won't cycle through 3 million cycles before it breaks. And I said, interesting. And he goes, I'm just going to make a prediction for you right now. He goes, you're going to see a spate of transmission failures and transmission problems in the neons somewhere down the road. So it's kind of interesting because there were different cars that have come along that have kept my legal practice rolling. And I remember a point in time where, some particular trucks had bad brakes. And I remember another, model of car that had bad transmissions. We've talked about those. And, a particular make and model of car that's got a bad electronics in it. The infotainment centers. I'm always joking about those because many of them were bad for a little while. And sure enough, there was a period of time where people would call my office, say I got a Dodge Neon or a Chrysler Neon or Plymouth Neon. They changed the badges on it a few times. And it's got transmission issues. Now, I never had to diagnose them to the point where I had to know what part failed. But I like to think that my friend who predicted it was right. And that's, I understand how that would work in a big organization where somebody built the transmission, they got it running, they put it in the car, they got a deadline to meet, and somebody says, oh, by the way, the prototype transmission that we built has a part in there made out of an exotic metal. And by doing that, we stuck it in a really small space. It turns out we can't replicate that with cheap metal. We've got to use an exotic metal. And some pricing person said, no, we can't do that. It'll cost too much. And it makes you wonder, somewhere down the road, did they realize that's a problem and upgrade that spring? Or did they just say, fix them when they come in? And it makes you wonder. Very good friend of mine, who's a Finnish American. Actually, I think he's just a Finn. I don't think he's quite a full American citizen yet, but he's from Finland, but he lives in America. And he works at one of the big three doing pricing. And he's one of the guys who's in charge of figuring out what it costs to build a particular car. And then they use that as the basis for them to figure out how much they got to mark it up and all that other stuff. And so somebody out there is doing an accounting task to figure out what a car costs to build. And I understand that there are thousands and thousands and thousands of components going into a car, especially if you break down the engines and transmissions and all these things. And if you disregarded the costs, where you said, it doesn't matter, just build it as best you can, yeah, you'd get a bulletproof car that costs $3 million. Okay? I'm joking, of course, but it would cost a lot. So the idea is that you got to do everything you can to lower the price. The question is, what do you determine to be the reasonable thing? Is it reasonable to say that most of these cars will survive their warranty period? Or that some of them will survive their warranty period, but if they don't, we'll fix them on a case-by-case basis? There's a period of time where Chrysler in the 1970s got into trouble because they had so many cars coming down the assembly line with problems. And somebody said, well, we've got a problem. If we stop the assembly line or slow it down, we build fewer cars. We'd rather build more cars with problems than fewer cars with fewer problems. And this was a decision that somebody made in Chrysler. So what they decided to do was, how about this? We'll ship the cars with defects and tell the dealerships to fix the problems, and then we'll pay them for the warranty repairs. And everyone wins. Except, of course, that dealerships aren't equipped to inspect a car as well as a consumer will when they buy it. So what was happening is the dealers were just taking the cars and selling them. People would get in the car and drive it home, and like the door handle would fall off, or the trunk wouldn't open, or something would just fall apart. And they'd take it back to the dealer, and the dealer, of course, the dealer would be happy to fix it. But people are going, I bought this car, it's a piece of junk. And Chrysler, the guys who made the decision to say, oh, ship them defective, we'll fix them later, didn't factor in that it's not the cost of the repair that's going to hurt you. It's the cost of harm to the goodwill of the customer who's going to go, I bought a piece of junk. And even if they were told, oh, that's okay, we'll fix it, don't worry about it. No, they still bought a piece of junk. Nobody wants to return their car to the dealership for warranty repairs. And I've mentioned before, people have joked about all the Explorers I've owned. And my Explorers don't go back to dealers for warranty repairs because they don't need warranty repairs. They just haven't. Now, yours might, but mine haven't. So going off my own personal experiences, I'm happy with my vehicle. Doesn't need warranty repairs. So if I found out later the transmission in my car failed, and I took it to the dealership and I found out a bunch of them failed. And a bunch of them failed because somebody, when they were pricing out a spring in the inside of that transmission, said, well, we can buy the spring for a penny and it'll fail. Or we could buy that same spring for 8 cents. But that 7 cents is going to kill us across the platform. So let's just put in the 1 cent spring and hope it makes it. Even after the spring experts have told you it's going to fail. That would bother me. But of course, I know this kind of thinking goes on not just at Chrysler, not just at any of the, it goes on at all of the companies. I understand that. But that's the thing. If nothing else, what the car companies should do is they should actually say, okay, we can bring in Steve's Finnish friend and he can calculate what it cost us to build this car. Let's find the equivalent person who will study how much it costs us in Goodwill when someone buys the car, drives it, and gets so angry when the car breaks down and finds out that it was a problem that somebody had predicted and anticipated and they chose to ignore it. That's a problem. And of course, you can't monetize it. You can't quantify that. But of course, that explains why a lot of people in the 70s were saying, I'm not going to buy an American car again. I brought the thing home and I hit the turn signal, turned my own driveway, and a turn signal indicator fell off. Weird stuff like opened the glove box and the glove box door fell on the floor. Weird stuff, Oh, they'll fix it. Of course they'll fix it. I don't want to spend half a day taking it back in to get it fixed. It's a waste of my time. And again, I'll factor that in next time I'm asked, do you want to buy another one of these cars? No, I don't. I don't want to have to worry about getting the damn thing fixed under warranty. So that's the story of the Neon Springs. Questions or comments, put them below. Let's talk to you later. Bye-bye.